veins. Blue and one, I red, white, and blue in my brain. I'm bulldog born. Bulldog, that's my breed. I was born to follow where the bulldogs lead. Let's start it.
Inside the Kennel podcast is proudly sponsored by our partners, the Railway Hotel Yarraville, Harley and Rose West Footscray, and Alpha Cafe Witten Oval.
Ladies and gentlemen, this man had a sidestep that should have its own postcode. It's Twinkle Toes himself, my co-host, Dancing Dougie Hawkins.
How are you, Twinkle Toes Dougie himself had a sidestep of a postcode. Good on you, Matty. Good to see you, brother.
Oh, indeed, Dougie. It's awesome to see you. And do you know who we're talking about today?
No idea, Matty.
Well, it's one of your old teammates, the great Andrew Purser.
What a player, Matty. Matty, what a player, mate. Seriously. I played with Gary Dempsey for a year back in 78. Dempsey won his Brownlow in 75. Six-time best and fairest winner. Great champion ruckman. Fourth best player in the 25 players of 100 years at the Bulldogs. That speaks for itself. This bloke I had for probably Matty 6-7 years. I reckon he started about 83. Maybe Matty, 83?
83, yep.
And he finished when Mick finished in 89, I reckon. Did he play 90? I don't think he played 90.
He actually finished in 87, Dougie.
He finished in 87.
Believe it or not, he went back to West Perth in 88. Yeah, he was finished. Yep.
He played 4 years only, Matty.
5, 83, 4, 5, 6, and 7. 5 years.
Wow. Geez.
Yep.
I reckon Matty probably lucky to be 6'4". How's that sound?
He was exactly 6'4", Dougie, 193 centimetres. You nailed it.
It wasn't much. He was no bigger. Mate, he was just sensational player, Andrew Purser. Wore the number 1 on his back. Mate, he had a heart as big as the Witten Oval. Mate, he was just sensational to play with. His just ability to run and put. Like he rucked a lot of the time on his own, majority of the time over that 4-year period. Probably got to the stage there, Matty, where his body, or he's had enough. Just maybe at that stage, he'd probably be 26, 27, 28 more maybe. He won the best and fairest in 84. Which ripped my heart out, Matty, by the way. But I've moved on. I'm not bitter. Beat me via vote. One vote, Matty.
Didn't you actually go up to the podium?
I did. Kevin Hillier called me up and announced me as my first Charles Sutton medal winner of the 84 medal. And I was absolutely, Matty, footy's about grand finals, but to win the best and fairest is very important, particularly named after the great Charlie Sutton. And I'd won it by a vote, and then I think it was Shane O'Sullivan said, listen, there might have been an error with the last round of votes. And Kevin said, Dougie, can you go back off the stage? And then 5 minutes later, Kevin gets up and he says, ladies and gentlemen, there has been a mistake with the counting in the last round. We have the new winner of the Charles Sutton medal. It is Andrew Purser. I was filthy, but I was wrapped because Andrew Purser was a superstar and a great player and had a great year. But to lose it in that way, Matty, was really gut-wrenching, to be honest. The next year I backed up, but anyway, it's not about me. It's about Polly. Polly Purser, mate, he gave everything. Mate, he gave everything. Great competitor, good overhead, reasonably good at ground level for his size and for his weight. Mate, and just a terrific bloke. Lovely bloke. Andrew Purser, Gary Dempsey, Scott Wine. I was very, very lucky to play with 3 great champions. Again, only the 4 years with Polly. That surprised me, Matty. Just I thought he was there at 89, 87. And then Scotty Wine must have come along.
Yeah,
89, 90? Hey,
no, 88, he was there from Chicana.
So Scotty Wine was 88.
88, yeah, absolutely. So he was.
I played 6 years. I played 6 years, Matty, with Scotty.
Incredible, isn't it?
He played bone on bone for about 4 years. Scott Wine.
Yeah, right.
Took Charlie home, won a Brownlow medal. best and fairest, Matty too, I think. But when you're playing with blokes of that ilk, you know, Scotty Wine, Andrew Polly Purser, and the great Dems, well, mate, Purser was right up there. He was a great player, Matty. Absolutely sensational player. Good footy brain. I'll say it again. Tough, Matty. Tough. He's taken on some of the big ruckmen. You know, the Maddens on these blokes in that mid-80s. You know, when Essendon were at their powerhouse stuff, Salmon and all these type of players, mate. Purse used to give it to him.
So how does an undersized ruckman? So this is a person who's shorter than Bont. Compete with the likes of the Maddens and the Salmons and Ironmonger. Lee from Richmond.
Peter Moore,
big boys.
all them blokes. Peter Moore.
Come on,
mate. He was a freak.
Right.
Polly Purser was a freak, mate. Great nature, relaxed, but on the footy ground when he crossed that white line, just so competitive.
Right.
So competitive. Hated to lose, wanted to win. Matty, you want your daughter to go out with. He's just a gentleman. Andrew Purser for me, Matty. I loved him. He gave you everything he had. Every time he crossed that white line, he gave it to you. Superstar. How many games did he play, Matty, at the Bulldogs? 100?
Yeah, 112 games for us. Yep.
Right. Fantastic. Loved him. Great player, Polly.
And am I right in saying that Mickey Malthouse had a bit of a rule to sort of say, hey, don't go into the inside 50s. We want you to stay outside of that. And so he was a bit of a kick behind the play ruckman, right?
Yeah, he was, Matty. You're right. He actually was because of our setup with Beasley and Lully Bamlett. And then, of course, you got across half forward Jimmy Edmond. Every now and then Peter Foster would go across there as well. The forward line structure was sort of revolved around them. Then you had Choco Royal at ground level with Lally, was very, very, very dangerous. Magic McLean can go inside 50 and be a dangerous player as well. So we had a marking sort of forward line. So really Polly formed that line back out, particularly at the Whitten Oval on my wing. That's where they would, like to defend. And he would be next to me most of the time out in that wing. And that's what Mick did. He had him kick behind the play, or not behind the play, but, well, he was behind the play. And he just dominated the air or punched the ball, mate. The ball wouldn't go past him.
Oh, absolutely love it. Well, we can't wait to have him come in. And do you know what, Dougie? I can hear him knocking. There it is.
Love you, Polly. You're a star, mate. You gave everything. Great courage and a star. Love you, brother.
Legend, Dougie. Thanks a lot. We're bringing in Polly.
On ya, Paul.
Thanks, mate. Ladies and gentlemen, if you loved rugged, relentless footy in the 80s, you'll love this man. He owned the centre square at Whitten Oval, and he is Ruck royalty and a Bulldog favourite son. It's Andrew Polly Purser. Welcome, Polly.
G'day, Matty. How are you doing? Good to be on your podcast.
Oh, indeed. Look, so many of our fans have been saying, get Polly on, so we're absolutely stoked to have you today.
Yeah, no, it's good on, mate. We've got good memories of the 80s. Actually, I was with Simon Beasley just today. He's in Perth catching up with a few mates and having a 70th birthday. But we were talking about, we always go back and talk about the good old days. But it was really, it was a real adventure for us going over there and playing for the Bullies.
Oh, incredible. Well, I can't wait to investigate that. I want to start by asking you though, Polly, how would you describe yourself as a player?
Honest. It is. I mean, I just had that's really good technique. I just get more free kicks than anyone because I just used to make sure I was in front and boundary throw-ins, particularly around the ground. Just had this. And Don Scott taught me the technique, and Don was probably a small guy, but I remember him coming over to Eastern Randall and showing me, I said, look, if you're going to be a small, effective ruckman, you've got to have this technique to get yourself in front position. And once you get that, then you can command the space. So and he was, I must admit, his technique was great. And so generally, most of the years, I'd get more free kicks than any player I'd be up the top of free kicks because I get that front position and I get pushed in the back and then I get a free kick or over the shoulder. I'd have no chance coming in behind and trying to leap over the top.
I want to take you right back to your junior days. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your earliest memories? And I understand you lived just north of Perth and played with a lot of really talented players, including some incredible Indigenous players. Can you tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about that journey?
Well, I went to a school that's called Magumba, which is about 100 kilometres north of Perth. We were farmers, and I was the only son. I used to kick the footy out in the cow paddock next to me because I didn't have a brother. I used to just kick it to myself and muck around. And I went to school initially was only 23, 24 kids. And then the Magumba, actually, sorry, I went to Magumba Primary School. There was 80 kids there. And they all, about 60 of them were from, this was stolen generation, I suppose would be termed now, but they were in a mission out at Magumba, which was on the Moore River. It was a fantastic facility. I used to go out there after school and go catch the bus with them. We had 80 kids. There was probably 60 Indigenous kids that came from the mission, and then about 20 local farmers' kids. So we used to, and then in those days, you'd go down at lunch, morning recess lunch, you'd kick the footy. And that's what we did. You'd scoff your lunch down and tear down the oval, the playground, and you'd play, we'd call it waxing. You'd one tall guy, one small guy, and then you'd wax your big guy or your small guy, and you'd say, look, you get the ball, and we'd just share the kick. So there's about 60 Indigenous guys that went to the played it, went to Magumba, and you learnt your craft pretty good there because they were, the Kenny Dempsters and the Dale Kickets and the Dempsters and all the Windmars. They were all at Magumba, relations or what. But and then I played my first footy. I played with Magumba, with the Magumba, I suppose, underage kids, which were all pretty much principally the Indigenous guys. So it was a great background, really. And funnily enough, I caught up with a few of them here and there along the way later on. So um, so that was really, and then I went to high school down in Perth, and I got then East Fremantle that was the zones, a bit like at Footscray, how the Gippsland area was zoned. So my zone was East Fremantle, and I ended up getting went down there and played Colts, which was under 19s effectively, and then the reserves I played for a year, and then '79 I played league and we won a premiership, which was really good. So my background was good. I mean, I'm forever thankful that I went to Magumba because playing weekends and footy with and all that, basically we had about two or three white guys. The rest were all Indigenous kids in the team, so it was great. Yeah, we had a good time.
Love hearing that. Love hearing that. So after this pedigree, you went, as you're saying, to East Fremantle, and you landed in this incredible team. I know that the Lester Smith was in there, Bahaja, Saul, Pete, Kenny Judge, yourself, obviously. That sounds like a pretty unbeatable team. Tell us about that.
It should have been in a way. Mario Turco was another one. Doug Green was another guy who played for South Melbourne. Probably about 8 or 9 guys went on and played AFL. But South, it was a derby, so it was a fantastic game. We had the record crowd, 55,000 at Subi. It was packed to the rafters. But South Fremantle had a principally Indigenous team. Well, they were very heavy orientated. Stephen Michael was a champion ruckman, Morris Rioli, Benny Vagona, and they had 3 or 4 other, because they used to recruit a lot of Indigenous guys from Darwin. There was a guy there who had a very strong connection with the Indigenous, all the teams up in Darwin, and that's where Morris and Riolis and the Vigonas and Basil Campbell, another guy. So probably half their team were Indigenous guys. So they were a very talented team. We finished 4th. They finished on top. We ended up playing the grand final and beating them. We had a really good team, but it was a great game. And and winning it was really, it was great because we had that, that really big crowd. The waffle and those just prior to the AFL thing, that was quite, I think even South Australia had, very strong. We went over East Fremantle. We went over and played St Kilda in an Escort Night Cup. The games you played on Tuesday. We beat St Kilda over there actually about the year before.
Yeah, and I understand with Tony Bahaja being one of your teammates, am I right in saying that he was the person responsible for giving you your nickname that stands today?
Yeah, it was funny because I was just a young kid and Budge was, really, he goes, I reckon you're going to be like Polly Farmer. I said, oh yeah, as if I be. So anyway, he said, I'm going to call you Polly Purser. So then I got that, and then Sully took it over when we went, because we went over together. He said, what do you call him? I said, oh, Polly. So I said, fair enough. But I was very honest. I actually got to know, I knew Polly quite well back here in Perth. and he was an older guy, but he was great. He was an icon then,
Wow.
and very humble guy. But obviously, Mr. Football was a great. Even when he came back, I remember a grand final, 71 grand final. He played for West Perth. His last game, he was captain coach, and he was really dominant then. But yeah, so that was how Budgie started that one off. You
Fantastic,
mentioned
fantastic.
Budgie. That'd be exactly, that'd be him down to a T.
Love the budge.
Hmm.
So you went on to win the 1981 Best and Fairest as well in this team that you're sort of speaking of. So I guess that was your pathway to Melbourne as you describe, and you're saying that a number of teams contacted you. Were Doggies one of the very first, or was it sort of like
No, it
your
was probably the last guy. Had Melbourne, Dick Seddon, I think it was a guy who was recruiting then, and another guy, North Melbourne rang up. It was probably around about the same time because they all started to. And then I remember, but Bluey actually came over to Perth, and
wow?
we sat down, we met with him, and and he was pretty honest. He said, "Look, we've got a long way, we've got a lot of work to do." And I mean, it'd been a bit. Him getting appointed coach was a bit. He'd obviously replaced Hoy's Hart halfway through the end. He said, "Look, I've got a vision." It was great. I mean, he was a ruckman, and he came in over and said, "Look," and it was all this sort of smoke and mirrors. He said, we're going to," which seemed a bit strange now thinking about it. So we're going to pick you round two. And I said, "Okay, that's fine," because I knew I wouldn't have been picked. That I would have probably gone to Melbourne, North Melbourne. So I said, "No worries, Blue, you can do that." As it turned out, I got picked round one,
Oh,
but yeah, and I was fine. I was a bit hesitant at the time, and then Nick Collum and Shane came over, and really, they were, they sold a great story. I mean, I mean, Nick's very, very positive guy, and he was very, and then they had quite a few new directors, and the whole thing took a refresh. And Shane was really instrumental in that, I think, and also very good to the import guys. Shane said, "Well, I'm going to concentrate on picking West Australians because I've just come from Carlton. I really love Kenny Hunter, and if you're half as good," I said, "I'm no Ken Hunter, I promise you that." And he said, "I don't care. I'm going to just pick West Australians." So he said, "I'm really happy you coming." And then he then went and got Jimmy Sewell was a 26, 27-year-old. He said, "I'm going to get Sewley," because he was initially drafted, or he had a Form 4 with Carlton, and they bought that out or negotiated that. And then after that, he really loaded up. We had Ian Williams and Brad Hardy and Alan Daniels and Murray Rance.
yeah, well, fantastic effort. So Shane O'Sullivan, he was responsible for bringing over a huge troop, as you say, of Western Australians. So
Yeah.
what was it like? You crossed the Nullarbor border, you come to sunny Footscray. What was your sort of feeling like when you arrived?
This is funny yarn. Jenny, my wife, we came over. I said, "I've got to go over to the Western Oval to pick up something or do something. Come over and I'll show you the Oval." So we pulled up out the front, and all of a sudden, this old beaten up ute came tearing in, pulled up next to us in a cloud of smoke. This guy got out, and he said, "G'day, love. How you going?" And I said, "G'day." And then he walked off and she said, "Who?" Because he had this mullet on, and I said, "I think he's meant to be their best player." She said, "You're kidding." Because this is Doug Hawkins, Jenny. Anyway, that was, and then later on, we found out how good Doug Hawkins was. So we had some funny, things, and it was really good. And Shane was great because he'd been involved with Carlton and was successful and so on. So, we were ever thankful that we made the transition. It was quite a dry year. I think it was they had those fires up in the hills.
Yeah, the
Was it
Ash Wednesday fires. Yeah,
Ash Wednesday? And the whole of Melbourne was in water restrictions. So we got there, and the ovals were all brown because they weren't allowed to water them. And the other funny thing, well, different thing than us, is that all the footy ovals in those stages had cricket pitches. They all played cricket on the oval, so you couldn't get onto the Western Oval. And a guy called Merv Hughes used to play for Footscray, so they'd always be in the finals right to the end, and we'd get about a week before to train on the oval. So we all get our gear and our joggers, and we'd jog down to Skinner Reserve, which was this little pothole thing. I thought, God, if this is AFL, like it was nowhere near, because in Perth all the footy ovals are used for footy, and they've got separate cricket ovals. So we used to just jog down 10 minutes down to this oval Skinner Reserve. It didn't have a blade of grass on it. It was dry and dusty, and it was pretty tough going. I thought this is more like country footy than VFL footy. So that was really the introduction. And then we got on to the Western Oval, and the centre square is like it's cricket pitch, and the ball gets bounced in the first 4 or 5 games. It goes about 40 feet in the air because the umpires can ping it, and then after that games, and then it's like it's a different area. When you watch the footy in the 80s, 70s and 80s, it's different than it is now. And then Malthouse used to get right into us because all the West Australians used to wear, because we only ever wore moulded soles because we never had screw-ins, a thing called screw-in there when it was comfortable. And then a few of us would be running around in moulded soles, and he'd come in at quarter time and he'd bellow and I used to say, you blokes, any of you guys got moulded soles on? And we go, oh no, not me. And then we go, poor Ronnie Johns, who's the booster. And then Ronnie get me the screw-ins, and it was a bit tricky for me too because in the centre it was quite hard. So screw-ins were a bit slip, they didn't really dig in. And then once you got off the centre square, it was a bit soft. But anyway, yeah, it was a different way of different. It took some adjustment to the conditions, but we had a new team and everyone was pretty positive and we're winning a few games. So.
Right. Well, welcome to Melbourne, Polly. It sounds like a baptism of fire. And when you're not on Skinner Reserve, you're out playing some practice matches just before the 1983 season. And I understand that Teddy Whitten Jr. did his knee, a career-ending knee.
Teddy, at the Ash Wednesday, he did his, and that was pretty much. He tried coming back a few times, and obviously the surgery and those things weren't as sophisticated as they are now, but.
So after Teddy went down, you must have been thinking, what have I done here coming across to the Dogs? Because we got absolutely belted by the Premiers in Carlton in the practice match as well by about 100 points.
Yeah,
So entering round one, I guess it was probably a feeling certainly amongst the media that this is just going to be another season of the Doggies sort of at the bottom of the ladder.
Yeah. Well, it's even worse because Templeton and Ian Dunstan had left in the summer of '82, so that wasn't great either. So there was it wasn't that positive a vibe initially, but then I think we won a couple of games.
Love it. So take us to your first game. You described 9 or 10 players pulling on the red, white, and blue for the first time in round one of '83, and you're one of them. You got the tap on the shoulder. Tell us about the big day.
Well, I think there was a ruckman who played he got injured. Barry, there was a guy, they had a regular ruckman in '82, but he was injured. I was able to get a slot, and once I sort of got that, it sort of, we kept it. I mean, it was playing out of way, but we'd played a few games out there previously with this Escort Cup, in previous years. So I was familiar, a lot of the West Australians were familiar with the ground. Anyway, it was all a bit of a blur because, you'd go out there and, we had a lot of new players and guys we didn't really know that well.
In that first game, you played on John Mossop and you got 15 touches, you had 20 hit outs, so you went pretty well.
I was a bit peeved. I think Brian Peake kicked 3 or 4 goals at the end and it probably won the game for him, which Jimmy and us were a bit annoyed about. And then the thing at the turning point was that we went back to Footscray and we played against Carlton the next week and won. And that I think it gave us a bit of confidence then so we can't be all that bad.
We flicked the switch, didn't we? And something clicked.
And they were playing. Fitzpatrick was playing one of his. I think it was his last season. So yeah. No. I mean, we were wrapped. Obviously, that gave us a real fill up, and from there, I think we got a bit of confidence, and we went on with it from there. But.
Am I right in saying that slamming Sammy Newman was one of your mentors early on when he came across to the Doggies?
Yeah, well, it's funny how Shane got onto him and said, "Look, we'll get Sam to come and help you out." And the funny thing about it, Sam came out and said, "Look, Andrew, all I'm going to say is I learned all my techniques were from Polly Farmer." He said, when I was down at Geelong, he said, "I'm not telling you anything. I know nothing. I only know what Polly Farmer taught me." Wow. I said, "Oh, good West Australia," because Sam's absolutely, he's a disciple of Farmer. And this technique, which in those days is probably illegal now, was to try and jump early and hold them off with it and use the other hand, which Polly did. So he said, "Look, I'm just going to try and show you the sort of technique that Polly used to use and taught me." So that was that was a sort, and then there's some funny things. Sam used to come down to our house and go, every time he came down, there was he came in a different car, and then he lived in Malvern. I lived in Paramus, and we used to just go up and he'd cut the tape, and we'd watch it. And probably for 2 or 3 years, we used to go and have a quick session with him on during the week. It was good fun. Yeah, it was quite funny. Yeah, he's a real character, Sam.
You yourself obviously, dominated from the outset because by round 12, you were selected to play for your state. You were
Yeah, well, that was a thrill. That was some great games. Those early State of Origin games were classic. And in fact, they've reinvented it this year. They had it here in Perth, and it got a big following. So, no, it's good to go back and play for West Australia. And the games are pretty close and tight. And the whole of Perth was shut down. They'd fill up Subiaco Oval on a Tuesday, which is a work day, and the State of Origin was pretty strong. It got a really strong following then.
Yeah, and I think the first game that you're speaking about that you played, it went right down to the wire. I think WA beat Victoria by 3 points, and it was a Buccanara show from memory.
Yeah, he kicked a couple of goals off the half forward line. So yeah, no, it was good. And as I say, to have to have a couple of wins, they still talk about it, which is good.
Love that, love that. So let's fast forward to 1984. You'd had a fantastic debut season, but 84 was full of hope because suddenly, we're on the winners list, as you say. But there was a practice match. You headed back over across to Western Australia to play against, I think it might have been the Swan Districts. And I'm told that there was an incident that happened mid-game that got you a little bit hot under the collar.
Well, so John Todd was the coach of Swans, which is the state coach, and he's always full of bravado, Toddy, and I suppose we were coming over to make sure, try and impress and be, I don't know how it came about, but we went down to Collie, which was the Swan District's country zone. So we caught a bus from the airport and we trundled down there. We stayed overnight and trained at the Oval. They got a big crowd. I remember, anyway, I think in the first quarter, Jimmy Edmund didn't play because he was injured anyway. He came running out and said, there's 19 men playing on the Oval. We want to told the umpires because we were running around. There's players going everywhere. I remember saying Ian Williams. I said because they must have put a spec. I said Raccoon because he knows what is going on, mate. He said I don't know. He said there's. I said get on your man, mate. There's players going everywhere. And anyway, Jimmy runs out, says the umpire, there's 19 men because I think one of the journos had seen Toddy put the spare guy out, and he went over to our bench and said there's 19 men out there. So we've stopped the game. And the umpires just did a head count, like everyone just counted, and then the guy that was spared just slipped out the back and off the Oval and walked off. I said, no, Swans have got 18 guys here. What are you talking about? I thought, oh, God, we look like, because we're about 2 or 3 goals behind, we're struggling. And then about 15 minutes later, Jimmy runs out again and said to the umpire, there's 19 men on the ground. So this time they lined them up. They got us all lined up and we counted up. And there was one guy, the 19th guy, was standing behind the 18th guy, like in his shadow. And Toddy came out or something. I don't know. Toddy was young. I said, Toddy, you're cheating. Bloody, this is bullshit. Toddy, I think it got a bit exciting. We had a few words, but it didn't come to much more than that. And Toddy shouldn't have done it really because that's a bit silly really. But in the end, we laughed it off because he picked me that year in the state game. And he said, "Oh, I'll forgive you for bloody shouting at me." I said, "Well, yeah, so you should be." Actually, I don't know. Mick got to because he used to get pretty heated about things. I don't think he laughed it off too. I think at the end, it's only a pre-season game, so. We didn't need to be too serious about it.
So speaking of Mick, he was ushered in at this time. How was that transition, and what sort of a coach was he in the early days for you?
Oh, it's really great. I mean, if you're in his camp, he's like a lion. Yes, he protects his own. But anyway, Mick came on, and he was only about 30. Was he 31-year-old? Rookie coach. But he added a lot of, he was obviously from a successful team and added a real lot of grit to us. We were sort of team that played like him. We had to sort of keep the teams to a losing score, be very defensive, which for us was fine because we weren't hugely, we didn't have a huge forward line, and we used to, a mixed thing of staying your man and keep your players, keep them to a losing score. We all related to it. He was tough, and you could relate to him. When he says, "I want you to go in and do," you could relate to that. And for me, it was great. I mean, I had a great rapport with him. I think, he was. I mean, in those days, it's a bit hard because we only had one. We used to run one ruckman, which was suppose now it would have been good because I'm sort of more of a running style rock. Some respects it would have been good to have a bit of a chop out because I could have, if that's your style, you could probably do a bit more. But towards the end, it became a bit of a grind. But anyway, it was good to be able to. I remember sometimes sneaking up the forward line. Ronnie Sims, who was our runner, used to run out and say, "Polly, get the hell out of there! You're not meant to be in that forward 50." And I said, "Oh, So we had to sort of set up the wall around the 50 line. And then Ronnie had come out and say, "Get out of there," which was fine. But anyway, he was good. And Mick, he was great for us, and he did a great job. It's just a shame at the end there in '88 things came a bit unstuck, and well, he came to the Eagles, and then the rest is just history. He had a great era here, and then went on to really become a real legend in the coaching sphere. But I think Bulldogs can be very proud that we sort of gave him his. I think he's very fond of Bulldogs too. The fact that it was his first stint, and they gave him his first job as a coach.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we came out of the blocks really early in 1984. Simon Beasley went berserk in round one, kicked 11, and we just got on a roll. And
Yeah.
by round 10, you might recall, Polly, you played in a really super famous match at the Western Oval. It was against the Magpies, and the game came right down to the wire. Can you recall what happened with Jimmy Edmond and Gubby Allen down at the
Yeah, well, I saw it now. I remember, obviously Gubby and kicked across, and Simon lurched over and grabbed the ball and kicked the winning goal. And then Jimmy went up to Gubby and said, "You're a bloody numbskull." But I think we're probably behind. Well, we're winning. I don't know. It was a close game all the time, but I mean, there's some good. That was a very famous victory. It was great that Simon. The thing about Simon too, he used to be able to kick the really miraculous goals. Sometimes when he's out in the middle of 40 out directly in front, and I'd jog back to the centre, and then all of a sudden he'd miss, and I think, "Oh, God, Simon." So then you'd have to go back and set up again. But he was great. And in '85, he kicked over 100 goals, and I don't know, how would he kick in '84? He probably kicked a fair bag too. Those forwards were kicking big scores, weren't they? Dunstall and Lockett and Beasley. I mean, it was an open. Nowadays, they'd block up the forward line. It's not that leading forward doesn't seem to have that impact like they did then.
They cramped the spaces. It was one-on-one back
Yeah,
then, and you had an
yeah,
open
yeah.
paddock, didn't you? And Simon.
Simon was quick. He was quick over on the lead, and he had a really good state game one of the years. He kicked quite a few goals. I think he won a medal, Simpson medal. But yeah, so he got off the chain a few times and kicked some big scores. But the Western Oval was a good atmosphere too. They'd had, we got good crowds, and the whole thing was, actually it's funny then because. I remember some guy came, Collingwood, because you're allowed to run onto the oval in those days, and the Collingwood bloody army guy came and hit me over the head with a flag, whacked me on the head, or with his stick as I ran off. So I gave him a boot up the bum, and I looked back, and then about half a dozen of these bloody Collingwood supporters chasing me down the race. And we had this guy, I think we were very nice, we used to call him Cement Head, a real tough guy, it's a doorman. Anyway, he said, "No worries, Polly." He said, "I'll look after him." And I looked back and he was just knocking them all down as they came running out the race. I said, and he said, "I got him, mate, no worries." I said, "Oh, thanks, mate." But it's a different era in those days. Remember the police horses used to go out and take the umpires in, and everyone used to run. All the crowd used to run in there, and then we'd have all the supporters come into the change rooms. We'd have probably 100 people in the change rooms. Watching us, I don't know, just get our boots off and that. It was a different era in those days. And that Collingwood game was one of them to remember for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And we just missed out on finals. We ended up playing the Pies again in the return game at Vic Park and getting done just in round 22. So we missed out on finals, unfortunately. But that took us to presentation night of the 1984 season. And, you'd obviously had a stellar year. Dougie Hawkins tells me that there was a little bit of a mix-up with the voting. Can you tell me what happened? Because he couldn't finish the story.
I got Because I know, I'm sure about the voting, but anyway, I ended up winning it. And the Hawkins cheer squad weren't particularly happy about it. We had it at it's a lot different now. I went to the Best and Fairest last year at the Crown, and at the play, whatever Crown play. I mean, that is it's great. There's 1,000 people there, and it's absolutely, but in those days, we just had the count at the club room, and I won it. I remember it was almost Mrs. Hawkins was there, and I think a few of the family, and they weren't particularly happy about me winning it. I think at the end of the day, it sort of it got, I just, I think, it didn't get out of hand, but it wasn't, they weren't happy camp. And then I think Hawk won it. Did he win in 85?
Yeah, he
Or,
did.
yeah,
He
so
did.
then it was good. Then I booed him. I said, no. But yeah, no, it's quite funny because an outsider winning it, and I think obviously Hawk won. What did he got second? Did he? Was there?
He did. He did.
Yeah.
Well, as Dougie tells it, he said that he was called up to the podium by Shane O'Sullivan, and they said Doug Hawkins is the winner, and then they said actually we've made an error with the counting, and Doug was
Oh,
told to
might
sit down, and you were ushered forward.
Obviously, that would have caused a bloody mayhem amongst Mrs. Hawkins. She was funny. She was a really nice lady, but they were, and his sister was pretty feisty. But yeah, no, it was good. I mean, it was all good and fun. But yeah, no, it was good to win. I've still got the medal, the old
Charles Sutton.
Charlie Son. Yeah, actually, there's a funny quick yarn. I've got Alistair Ford, who played with us in that era. He came over to a game last year, and he said, "I got recruited down. This is in the Royce Hart era. I played at Bairnsdale and had a really good game. They said, come down to Bulldogs. We want you to play a reserves game. So he came down and played really well. And Royce said, right, next week you're in the ones. He said, so played one reserves game. I suppose those days they were keen, they were needing players. So he came down from Bairnsdale, not much training. And then Royce came in and said, here, there's a very famous jumper, gave him the number 6, which was, he said, this is Charlie Sutton's jumper. And poor Alistair didn't, he wasn't a disciple of Bulldogs. Said, oh, well, whatever. So puts it on. He runs out, and then he said he looked up at the stadium. It's got Charles Sutton Stadium. He goes, "Oh, it's obviously a fairly important guy around the club."
So, Polly, as the reigning 1984 Best and Fairest winner, we advance now to the 1985 season. What a year! Tell us a little bit about that amazing season. It was the season that I fell in love with the club as a 9-year-old. What
Okay,
was so
yeah.
magic about it?
Well, we just seemed to win. We just won games. I think we beat Essendon up in Essendon, which was, in Windy Hill, which was good. Doug Hawkins still maintains. He said if we got in the grand final, I reckon we would have given Essendon a bit of a run for the money. Hawthorn were probably a bit of our bogey side, but we ended up losing by about 7 or 8 points in a pretty close game out at Waverley. In fairly controversial circumstances. Brett Hardy's been one of them, but anyway, it was a great team. It would have been good to play in the grand final, but I think it just was a great. I think in those days it was good because Bulldogs had a pretty rough period. I remember Neil Corley sitting because we had half the matches. You go, God, I can't believe how many games. Because Neil was in the early days wasn't that successful. But then in '85 we really got on the roll. So I think it gave the real heart, the true believers and the real supporters like yourself, something to really, to really catch on. Then they got a bit, but then in the '80s, in the '90s, when they got Newey with Chris Grant and Jono and all those, they had some fair success. So I think really from that time in '85, the Bullies have had some reasonable success over the '80s and '90s, and obviously into the 2000s. So and now the club's financially much stronger, and the whole thing's it's run so professionally.
I'm not sure if you know this, Polly, but in '85 we scored more goals than any other season in our entire history. So we had a brand, I guess, that was just prolific
Yeah.
the attacking style. And you
But
said earlier on,
Les Bamford on the wing kicking a few goals, and Shorty Daniels. Yeah, no, I think we had, and Brian Royal was kicking goals. Yeah, no, I think probably did have some good some good forwards, and obviously Beazer.
and
Yeah,
Beezer kicked 105. So
yeah.
we were unbelievable that year.
And the funny, and Beasley's always pretty positive about things. Simon is always. I think he had an okay year the year before. Maybe he hadn't. I don't know. But anyway, he was always pretty confident about things and used to lead, and then Hawke and a few others. Jimmy Edmonds was a good leader. He was tough as nails. So he used to, really, there was some, and Ricky Kennedy was coming up, coming through then. So we had a core of, and Brian Royal had come down from Bairnsdale, so he was a great player for us initially. So we had a core of really, quite a good core of, strong players.
You also just mentioned that you pretty much rucked as a solo man,
Mm.
right through there. I don't know if you remember, but in round 10, you got reported and suspended in a game against Collingwood. So the only game you missed from 1983 to '87 to 88 rather, was the St Kilda game in round 11. And Alistair Ford, who you mentioned, came in to fill in for you that
Well,
game.
he played for Scott. I got reported for hitting Brian Taylor against Collingwood. I
Right.
still to this day, I still say, I mean, I chopped him. I went to chop his arms, but he was sitting. He actually was on his knees, so I ended up banging him on his nose. To this day, I still believe I was just sort of like an involuntary thing. It looked like I was turned around and I'd actually bopped him on the nose. But anyway, it was funny because in those days you go to the tribunal and you'd go in initially, all the media would watch that, show you the vision, and then all the media go, "Oh God!" So then you say your bit, and then you go outside. It was in VFL House, and the wall was like just a petition. So Shane was got his ear against the, the petition and goes, "Oh, Polly, one guy wants you for 3 weeks. One guy wants to let you out off, and another guy wants a week. So you're going to get a week. So you know what you, because they could hear through the petition. They walk in, so you know what you're going to get. They give you, yeah. So I got a week for bopping Brian Taylor on the nose, and Glenn James was the umpire that reported me, which is pretty funny in a way because I've been involved with the Indigenous guys for so long. But anyway, 1 week wasn't here, and then 40 got I think he played against St Kilda,
He did. Yeah, yeah. He
but
played. He played a really good game,
yeah, yeah.
Polly.
He
But
probably should
he.
have played some more footy. Really, 40. He was a very good athlete.
Oh, well, I wanted to ask you that because
Mm,
he obviously that was the only game he played for the entire season. He was an emergency for about 17 of the games.
mm,
So it meant that you were basically the solo ruck.
mm.
Do you think it may have been a difference had you have had that second ruck just to give you that extra energy and
Well, I
also.
suppose if yeah, I mean, I don't think I'd play forward, play that great. I think Malthouse said, "Well, you can't play forward." But in this '80s era, they just and there's quite a few guys. Mark Lee played solo. Peter Moore was the solo ruckman for Melbourne. A few other, Saru. The only ones were a bit tricky because they had Essendon had three. They had buddy Simon Madden and Paul Salmon, and then Merritt would come in and buddy soften you up a bit. So occasionally, but it probably did towards the end. That's why I only played 5 years. I said to Mick at the end of 5, mate, I said, mate, my batteries are run out. I was 29. I'd probably maybe in another year if I could have played a bit longer. But I said, mate, I just can't, keep going. And I was a smaller ruckman. I wasn't complaining because I, like to get out, be out there. Most players like to play as much as they can, but
Well, you played 112 out of a possible 113 games in that period, Polly. So if you think about resilience, you absolutely personify that. It's incredible. Can you tell us who some of your or who your greatest opponents were? Like you played against some giants, didn't you? Were there three or
well,
four?
the Madden boys were always pretty tough. I mean, Simon he was technically he had the technique of being left-handed, and he'd do that polyfarm thing. He'd try and stick his leg out and hold you away. So you had to be a bit careful with him. Madden was tall. Justin Madden went to Carlton. He was tall, so he was difficult. John Ironmonger was up at Sydney. He was a fairly tall guy. Mark Lee was mean, pretty strong and mean. And Moore got around. He ran. He used to run around a fair bit. And then Jeff Saru. The Jeff Saru was probably the toughest because he just belt the hell out of you the whole day. He didn't care about playing footy. Yeah, they were the ones probably that come to mind. Roger Merritt was a tough guy because he used to play physical. So there was, it was always someone. And in fact, every team had a fairly reputable ruck guy. So you weren't ever. I don't think you would ever have a guy that was, you'd come up with an easy sort of. Matt Rendell, the late Matt Rendell, he was good for Fitzroy. So yeah, no, there was always a tough component to play against.
Ah, that's unbelievable. And you yourself were at like 193 centimeters, is that right?
Well, I said 90, 194, yeah,
Yeah.
in boots.
But that's Bontempelli's height.
Well, that's the thing. We went to the Best and Fairest last year because of the centenary, and I line up against Bont and go, and he's looking me in the eye, and go, bloody hell, and Kernahan. Well, Steve Kernahan was centre forward. He's probably even a little bit taller than me, but yeah. So there's probably, I mean, Moore was probably about my height, Peter Moore, and there's probably a few around that in that 80s that weren't huge.
Look, you just briefly mentioned the 85 final series. So we had three finals, didn't we? We lost, the first ones against
Yeah, to
Hawthorn.
Hawthorn, yeah.
Yeah, but things turned around, didn't they? That preliminary, the semi final against the Kangas was one of the best games that I recall.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
remember that? Remember that
yeah.
game?
Well, that was good. That gave us a bit of confidence to go into the preliminary. I think we won it pretty well back at the MCG too. So it was, in a way, we got shell shocked with Hawthorn, and then we came back and had a really good win, which was good. Yeah, that was a great win. I don't know. Probably the Crackers played in that game, did they? So they probably had some fair players, and a few others. I mean, they were, yeah. I mean, North were always pretty tough. Yeah, no, it's good, and I think we had a reasonable crowd. Obviously, finals footy was good.
So 85 wasn't to be, as you say. But 1985, we went on a post-season trip, and some of the players who've come on have given us little tiny snippets of what had happened. Is there anything that you could share from your perspective?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because Jenny, my wife, said they listened. She was listening to the radio. The news came on the ABC or the news on Saturday morning. I think it was Friday. She said, "Well, the morning," and it said the Footscray players in trouble in Hawaii. I thought, bloody hell, what's happened? They've crashed the plane, or that was the headline. Footscray players in trouble in Hawaii. I thought, bloody hell. The captain said as he landed, said, "Right, I want the Footscray players to stay on the plane." So he came. He was only about 5'4". He came. You could see his cap walking down and said, "You are the most unruly guys I've ever had on a plane. This and that. You're a threat to aviation safety and that, and you're going to get kicked off." So we all just meekly, we're all pretty tired by then. I think it was about sort of early in the morning, and I ended up just meekly sort of walking off the plane and going, "Bloody hell, what's going to happen here?" So, and then I think Shane found out somewhere, and he was okay because he always supported us and said he knew what guys. I think it was the end of. I think what it was the end of season club trips. I think we probably put an end to it, but. I think the main problem was we ran out of beer. So the Qantas didn't have much beer on board for the players, and then they started to switch to spirits. By the time we got to Nandi, because they used to stop there in Duflo, the guys were, a lot of them were pretty legless, and we sort of playing up. So I think if everyone had been able to drink beer, but we got tipped off. But the funny thing was we got to LA eventually. We got kicked off at Hawaii, and some guys took flights and got up to Los Angeles, and others stayed on the beach. Simon Beasy held a press conference with Michael Willis on the beach at Hawaii. But we got into LA, and then we'd go to places like Universal Studios or Disney, and all these guys, "Man, you're those footballers from Australia. What do you do with those? What do you do with those hostesses?" It became quite comical in a way. And poor old Shane O'Sullivan had the worst thing because Qantas had cancelled the flight, a return flight. So he had to then go and book alternative, flights and get us all back. And it cost me, I think it cost the club a bit more than, a bit extra to try and get us all back. But actually Mick was on the flight at the time. We were sitting at the front. I think it got probably by a proportionate bit. There's a few guys. We landed in Hawaii, and the breakfast got served, and that got a few of the guys started to throw that around, and it got a bit unruly. But we had a good time, and it worked out fine because when we got up to Los Angeles, we ended up I remember going out to the Rams, the NFL training session. It was quite funny because Bret Hart had won the Brownlow that year. And we went to the training session, and there's all these guys. One guy, Eric Dickinson, would run the world, because they was the world record this and the world record that, because NFL's only played in America. So he was a world record running back, and someone else was and there was a couple of the wide receivers were actually ex-Olympian 400-meter runners. They were elite. And then you get the big, center, what they call the defensive linebackers, and that they're huge. Anyway. So someone said, well, they were training, and the guy said, "Oh, I think we said, who's your best player?" He said, "Oh, that guy there, Eric Dickinson. He's the world. He won the most rushing yards ever in the history league, the world running back." And then they turned around to us and said, "Who's your best player?" And he said, we looked around, and Brad had a pretty solid after season thing, and he was sitting with he had a hat on, sort of lounging on the bench over there, and sort of looking half drunk. He said, "Well, that's our world champion footballer." He said, "Man, that's your that's your world champion player." So, well, technically, he won the Brownlow medal. He's 5'4", and I think he put a fair few pounds on. Probably he'd been drinking a few things with zinc on his nose and a terry toweling hat. And they go, "Man, he's your world champion." Yeah, he's the world champion for us, which is quite funny. compared to
Oh,
Eric Dickinson, who was about 6'3" and rippled, muscly, rippled, thin guy which was a bit of a contrast. Yeah, no. So the trip was good. We had a good time in the end. We all got back in the end safe and sound, and I think that was the end of. I think it was the end of footy trips. I think AFL put a stop to it after that.
fair enough too. That sounds wise.
Mm.
Yeah, well, you came back. 86 wasn't to be, was it? It was a year of great promise, but there were, a lot of injuries, and Jimmy Edmond left the club. A lot of things
Mm.
conspired against us in the end. But, things came to a head at the very end of the season, and you talked about our world champion, Brad Hardy. He had a bit of a stoush, didn't he, at the end with the coach? Do you
Yeah, well,
recall
it
what
came to
happened
a
against
head.
Carlton?
Well, yeah, I think it was really the '85 grand final too. I mean, because we had that famous thing when at three-quarter time Mick went out and said to Brad, you know, Alan Jeans is going to put Lee Matthews back on Brad in the last quarter, and I don't want you to be running up the ground and doing this and doing anyway.
Oh,
Matthews kicked a couple of goals, and then back in the change rooms, Mick got really right into Brad and said, anyway, they got really a bit nasty. So I think, did he leave the end of '85 or end of '86?
86, yeah, end of
Yeah. Well, then it
86.
was a bit. I think the relationship was a bit sore from then, and then I mean he was a different sort of player than because Mick was always this back pocket player. You stay in your man, you don't run off, you do this, that. I mean, they were in contrasting styles.
Yes.
Um, but Brad was good. I mean, he was good for the profile of the game. For Footscray, he gave it a bit of profile, winning the Brownlow and so on. But yeah, well, actually, I think Mick, I don't know if you've ever heard him, he always contributes to '85. He said that was our best year because of all the things that happened and transpired over that time. We were only just still a kick, one game out of the final. I think I've heard him say that this is he's saying in all his footy career, that's what, Bulldogs, Eagles, and so on. He's on tape said, I've heard him on radio saying his proudest coaching achievement was the '85 Footscray season. So that was, that obviously says a lot.
Wow, wow, absolutely. Well, 87, came around, didn't it? And obviously you played your 100th game in round 10. And do you remember the amazing milestone against Fitzroy to play your 100th?
Yeah, we had a banner up, and it was yeah. I mean, we had a guy who's announced a ground. In those days, you had a ground announcer, and he was, it was good. And I've still got the trophy. It was a plate, acknowledging the 100 games and so on, which they presented after, at the back at the social club. And I think we won. Did we? I think we probably beat Fitzroy, which was good.
Yeah, we did. You got 3 votes,
Yeah.
Polly, and you played on Matty Rendell that day
Yeah.
as well.
So
Yeah.
it was, yeah, no, it was good. And then that was that year, I think, where Mick said, I think we missed out just by percentage to Melbourne, and then I didn't really think about it much, and then the end, I think after the season, I just thought I just couldn't go around again. I couldn't think of doing another pre-season, and and I just said to Jenny, my wife, I said, I think it's time. I think, and also the pull to go back to Perth was, family and I sort of had to get. Oh, the other thing was the big thing. Simon Beasley made the point. I was working in the stock market as stockbroking then, and the October the '87, the Black Monday, the big share market crash. And I remember Simon Beasley said, "Well, I'm going to play for another couple of years. The stock market's shot, so it's no good, hanging. I'm going to hang in and play footy for another couple of years," which he did. And I thought, well, it's probably the market. Share market had gone. The stockbroking firms were all, downsizing and retrenching. And I thought, well, before that happens, and then I thought, well, I think it's just a good time to finish. And then Dennis Gallimberti was the general manager. Shane had gone up to Queensland then. He'd left a year before or something, so things had changed a bit. And I said, Dennis, look, I'm going to retire. He said, you're what? I said, I know it's hard, but I just said, look, I'm done. I'm shot. I can't really, I just haven't got any more fire in the belly. And and then Mick had a, long chat and I said, look, I understand. I appreciate, where you're coming from. And he said, and we left on good terms. It was great. We had a great 5 years.
Yeah, we couldn't believe we lost you, at that young age. But
Mm.
I guess from all your descriptions there, that rucking solo for all those times, how much fuel can you possibly have in the tank to stay on the ground for 112
Well,
days?
and then some young guys coming, through, and I thought I didn't want them coming over the top of me. I thought, bugger this, well, I mean, I think the great Dennis Lee said that you want to finish when you're on top. You don't want to be going, out the door backwards. I thought, well, it's as good as any time to finish up now. So the job, the stockbroking job was tough. And then, the Bulldogs, there was no mention of any then at 87. We were still financially, everything was okay. I think 88, 89, it started to get a bit tricky.
Polly, we're getting close to the end of the podcast. If you could name your Andrew Purser Mount Rushmore, 4 faces that you'd carve into the side of a cliff, your best players that you played with at the Dogs, could you do that for us? Who would you choose?
Well, obviously, they called the wing after a certain player, Doug Hawkins. It was, I mean, we used to kick. There was a play. We used to kick the ball out to him and he'd even mark it on Dipper. That was a great tussle. But he had this technique. I don't know how he could mark it, but he was, Hawk swing, kick it a Hawk. Beasley, because he was fairly instrumental in our forward play, was really good. Brian Royal was probably being the rover that used to make me look good. Probably those 3 stand out. Probably Ricky Kennedy was a great leader for us. Really, I mean, I think tough and relenting. I remember one day I looked back and he was having a blue with Tony Lockwood. They belting the crap out of each other, and I just said, "Okay, Ricky, you can." I'll leave that one to you. I'm not getting involved in that. But him and Lockett were going for hammer and tongs. And I thought, he was pretty tough, Ricky. And he was a good leader for us really at the time. I think he was really good. So probably those 4, Ricky, Worley, Beezer, and then the Hawk, of course, because he's he was really he was great character. But they're all good characters too. Simon used to really give it. He was great around the club. He used to be was always making jokes about the Western Suburb boys. You blokes are bloody, because he lived over in South Yarra. You blokes don't know what he used to rip into them and they'd give it to him back. So it was all good fun. Yeah, no, so they're good characters, really.
Brilliant. And you must have had such incredible sort of partnership with, you talk about Choco Royal, one of the, the greatest rovers, the club's ever produced. But you also had, Magic Mick McLean, you had Dougie there, you had Wally, Steve Wallace.
Yeah, Steve Wallace, can't. They were great. I mean, all good guys. Magic Magic was great. Magic was he was the best guy in the gym. Him and me used to do, bench presses. Magic was really strong, tough. He was great and then I always had Hawk behind me sweeping. So we had Hawk sweeping behind and he was really good because if the ball bent back towards him, I could always push it back to him. And then we had, obviously, Royal was attacking, and then we had a defensive guy on the other side trying to keep their rover under control. So we had a pretty classy centre play with Worley and McGuinness and Hawkins and Tony McGuinness. Was probably as good as anyone really in the centre in those days. So always good. The Hawks here, and I remember him saying, "The Hawks here, Polly, the Hawks here." He'd call out, when if the ball banged, the Hawk. You'd hear him, it was quite funny, and you'd feed it out to him. And he never used to get it. He used to just look as though he was sort of doing it at half pace because he was so, he's under control. But it was good. We had some good memories.
Thank you.
And it's great. He still comes over to Perth, actually. You see him quite often. He comes over to do footy shows and things. And you see him, he comes here a couple of times a year. So he's always the first guy. When anyone passes away, he's always sent through a thing saying, Ronnie Simmons and Bluey Hampshire. He's always pretty, he's always pretty mindful of the old guys. I think keeps in touch with us all.
Yeah, unbelievable. So I guess you've got no regrets leaving, and you still follow the Doggies even to this day. I understand. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Someone said to me, well, how do you barrack for the Bulldogs? I said, mate, you spill blood for the Bulldog. Once you're not going to be barracking for anyone else. And I wasn't really aligned. I suppose a bit soft spot for the Dockers having played for East Fremantle, but no, the Bulldogs. And we still go. When they come over, we always go. There's a good supporter group that come over, and they have a supporters night before the game. So we always go to that and keep in touch with the guys. A few of the guys come over, which is good, and always keep in touch.
We absolutely loved you, Polly. We'd love to hear this final question, I guess. How would you like to be remembered? And do you have any final words and messages for Doggy supporters who have loved and adored you?
Oh, well, that's very nice of you. Thanks, Matty. Oh, I just say it's really a very cherished time of our life. I mean, both Jenny, my wife, and me really enjoyed the time there. It's really kept lifelong friends, and the supporters are, probably the best supporters you could ever ask for. I suppose every club's, every player says that about their supporters, but they were really genuine, and the Western Suburbs had a real sort of a feel about it. Ever since the day even Hawk came flying in and said, came in that first day, and we said, "G'day, love, how you going?" It's just very easy to be involved with a club like that. And I'm just so grateful and admire them for the work, how they've become, the club they are now. They've really just evolved from fairly humble, being a humble club. And I like to think, the '85 group played some part in getting them, moving them along a bit, which was, and we had some great times, lifelong friends. No, it was good.
Unbelievable. Yeah, well, I fell in love with the club from '85, and you were a huge part of that, Polly. So from the bottom of our heart, I just want to thank you on behalf of all our Bulldog supporters. Ladies and gentlemen, the great Andrew Purser.
Thanks, Matty.
Improvise and overcome. Feel the light and will to run. 23 turns into